You are 11 years old the first time you understand what your father left behind. Not because he tells you, but because you find a photograph tucked inside a Bible he never opens. A house with a tin roof, wider than the two-room apartment you now share above a shoe repair shop in Toledo. He does not explain the photograph. He puts it back exactly where it was, and you understand, without being told, that some doors only open once, and he chose, at 26, to close his behind him forever. Your mother, Concepcion, keeps a different kind of ledger, not photographs. Numbers, written in a small notebook she updates every Sunday night at the kitchen table. Rent, groceries, the electric bill, the $40 a month she sends back to her own mother, still living in the house with the tin roof, still farming a half-acre that never quite produces enough. You watch her add and subtract by hand because a calculator feels, to her, like an admission that the numbers might get away from you if you stopped paying close enough attention. This is not a story about poverty. Exactly. Though there was plenty of it, it is a story about the specific weight of being the first to be born in this country, the first to go to college, the first to hold a number in a bank account that your parents cannot fully picture because nothing in either of their lives gave them a reference point for what 6 figures actually feels like sitting behind a name. Your father works 2 jobs for 11 years. One at a warehouse loading trucks before sunrise, another cleaning offices after most people have gone home. He does not complain about this, not because he has made peace with it, but because complaining to him is a language for people who had another option and didn't take it. He took the only option that existed. You learn early that gratitude and resentment can live in the same house without ever fully resolving into one or the other. By 14, you have a job too, stocking shelves at a grocery store 3 nights a week, and you hand most of your paycheck to your mother without being asked, because you have already absorbed the family's central unspoken rule. Money moves toward whoever needs it most urgently, not toward whoever earned it. This rule will follow you for the next 20 years, sometimes as a strength, sometimes as a wound you don't fully recognize until much later. College happens because a guidance counselor named Ms. Oduya notices your test scores and refuses to let the conversation end at community college, the way it has for almost everyone else in your graduating class. She helps you find scholarships, fill out forms your parents cannot read quickly enough in English to trust completing alone, and by 18, you are the first person in either side of your family to walk onto a university campus. As a student, instead of as someone cleaning it after hours, your father drives you the 4 hours to campus in a borrowed truck. And when he leaves, he does not hug you the way you have seen other fathers hug their children in movies. He shakes your hand, firmly, the way he shakes hands with men he respects, but does not yet trust completely, and says only, in his language, that he did not come this far, for you to come this far and stop. You do not fully understand the sentence until years later. At the time, it just sounds like pressure, with nowhere to put it down. You study accounting, not because you love it, but because your cousin Ferdinand, 2 years older and already working at a mid-sized firm, tells you it's the fastest path to a number your parents can respect without needing it explained. You graduate at 22 with $31,000 in student loans and a job offer paying $52,000 a year. A number that sounds enormous to your mother and modest to everyone in the office you're about to join. The first decision that matters happens quietly. In your 3rd month at the firm, when a coworker named Priscilla mentions, almost in passing, that the company matches 401k contributions up to 4%. You had never heard the phrase before. You go home that night and read about it for 3 hours, not because anyone told you to, but because you have learned, from watching your parents, that information withheld from you was never given kindly, and information you find yourself is the only kind you can fully trust. 3 years after that first 401k conversation with Priscilla, the market drops sharply, and you watch $6,200 of your $9,800 balance evaporate inside of 4 months, an amount that would have covered 8 months of the family's old rent back when you were 14. Stocking shelves. You do not sell. Not because you understand market cycles with any real sophistication yet, but because pulling money out feels, instinctively, like admitting the whole experiment was a mistake. And admitting mistakes is not a skill your family ever modeled gracefully. The account recovers within 18 months and keeps climbing past where it started. You don't tell your mother about the drop, the same way you never told her about the contribution in the first place. Some numbers you're learning early are easier to explain after they've already resolved themselves. You set the contribution to 4%, the maximum match, the following week. It costs you $173 a month, money you could have sent home instead, and for the first time in your life, you make a financial decision your mother does not know about. Not because you're hiding it, because explaining a 401k to her would require explaining compounding, tax deferral, and vesting schedules in a language that doesn't have easy words for any of it, and you decide, quietly, that some decisions are yours to make without translation. This is the first quiet betrayal, if you can call it that, of the family's central rule. Money moves toward whoever needs it most urgently, except this money moves toward a version of you that does not exist yet. 20, 30 years down the line, and nobody in your family has ever been taught to consider that person a legitimate claimant on today's dollars. By 26, you have $34,000 in the account, a car loan finally paid off, and a raise that pushes your salary to $71,000. Your sister, Talia, 4 years younger, is now in college herself, on a smaller scholarship, still needing help most months. $200 here, $400 there, money you send without hesitation, because helping her feels like continuing something you started, not interrupting something you built. Your father retires at 63, not by choice, but by his knees, which finally refuse the warehouse work after 2 decades of loading trucks in the cold. His pension, from the years he spent at the second job, the office cleaning contract, amounts to $410 a month. Social Security adds another $1,180. Together, it is barely enough to keep the apartment, the same apartment, still above the shoe repair shop, though the shop has changed hands twice since you were 11. This is the moment the rule finally speaks its name out loud. You start sending your parents $600 a month, not dramatically, not as a rescue, just as a quiet redirection of the same rule that has always governed your family, except now the direction has reversed, and you are the one whose earning years overlap with their retirement years, in a way neither of them planned for, because neither of them had access to the kind of planning that assumes a comfortable retirement is even possible. Currently, researchers studying immigrant and first-generation households consistently find the same pattern. Adult children often become an unofficial extension of their parents' retirement plan, sending remittances not to a home country, but to a home apartment, absorbing a gap that a pension or a modest Social Security check was never designed to close. Nobody plans for this conversation. It arrives quietly, usually through a bill that's slightly larger than expected, and you simply start paying it because the alternative was never really a consideration. You marry at 31, a woman named Renata, whose own family immigrated 2 generations earlier, and has, by now, accumulated enough quiet stability that she does not fully understand, at first, why every financial conversation with your parents carries a weight. Hers never did. She learns quickly. She sits with you at the kitchen table the year your father's knee needs surgery, insurance covering only part of it, an $8,200 gap that arrives on a Tuesday with no warning and no flexibility in its timeline. You pay it from the same account that used to hold only your 401k contributions, now grown into something larger, something you started calling privately the floor. Though you never explain the word to anyone outside the house. The floor is not for vacations. The floor is not for a nicer car. The floor exists specifically for moments like this one, when a hospital bill arrives faster than sympathy can process it, and somebody in the family needs the gap closed by Thursday, not eventually. By 38, you and Renata have built something neither of your families has a name for. $340,000 across retirement accounts, a paid-off townhouse bought at 34 for $210,000 in cash saved specifically to avoid the mortgage anxiety you grew up watching your parents navigate around rent, and a small consulting practice on the side that generates another $60,000 a year, mostly from clients who found you through word of mouth in the immigrant business community. You grew up adjacent to, but never fully inside. At 39, a decision arrives that has nothing to do with money directly, though it depends entirely on the floor being real. The firm offers you a partnership track that would require 60-hour weeks for the next 5 years, the kind of schedule your father once worked without complaint. because complaint wasn't a language available to him. You decline. You take the consulting practice full-time instead. A decision that cuts your guaranteed income by $40,000 in year one, a number that would have terrified you at 22, back when $52,000 felt like an unimaginable ceiling instead of a distant floor. Your mother doesn't understand why you'd walk away from a stable job with a firm's name attached to it, a name she can say confidently at church, replaced by something vaguer, something she has to explain to her friends as he works for himself now, a phrase that carries less prestige in translation than it does in the language you actually live in. You don't try to correct her explanation. You let the ambiguity stand, because some decisions only make sense once the results arrive, and results, unlike intentions, don't need translating. Talia, the sister you once sent $200 and $400 to without hesitation, finished her own degree, became a nurse practitioner, and now earns enough that she quietly insisted on repaying every dollar. You'd sent her in college over your objections. In a single wire transfer that arrived, ironically, on the same day you were coordinating the contractor for your grandmother's roof. She didn't need to pay it back. She told you once, to know that the rule worked both directions, that money moving toward whoever needs it most urgently wasn't a debt owed specifically to you, but a current. She was now capable of running herself, of everyone in the family. Talia is the only one who understood the floor without ever being told what it was called. Your cousin Ferdinand, the one who steered you into accounting, calls one Sunday needing $15,000, a bridge for a restaurant he's opening. One, his own parents cannot help fund because they, too, are still sending money back to a country neither of you has visited in over a decade. You give it to him as a loan, documented properly this time, because you have learned, slowly and sometimes expensively, that undocumented generosity inside a family tends to curdle into resentment on both sides eventually. The restaurant succeeds, modestly, and Ferdinand pays you back within 18 months. But something shifts after that loan that neither of you names directly. He starts introducing you at gatherings as the one who made it. A phrase that sounds like pride and functions underneath like a quiet distance, because made it implies a finish line, and you have never once felt like you crossed one. You have only ever felt like you were still running, carrying slightly more weight than you started with, further from the beginning, but nowhere near anything you'd call an ending. There's a childhood friend, Emerson, who you grew up with 2 doors down, back when the neighborhood still had more shoe repair shops than coffee shops. He never left the block. Works maintenance for the same apartment complex you both grew up watching get built, and every few years you run into him at a cousin's cookout. And the conversation always finds its way, gently, to a comparison neither of you asked for. He mentions his rent increase. You don't mention that you haven't paid rent in 9 years. He asks if you still drive that same old sedan, and you say yes, mostly true, though the sedan now shares a garage with a car Renata leases for work that costs more per month than Emerson's entire mortgage payment. You don't correct the picture he's built of your life, not out of dishonesty exactly, but because correcting it would require explaining the floor, the 401k, the townhouse paid in cash, and none of it would land the way you'd want it to. Some friendships survive best on outdated information, and you've learned, slowly, which ones are worth updating and which ones aren't. Your daughter, Naledi, is born the year you turn 40. You bring her home to the townhouse, paid off, no mortgage anxiety waiting in the mail, and you realize, holding her in the kitchen, where you once watched your mother balance a checkbook by hand, that she will never know the specific fear of a landlord's knock, the specific math of rationing a $40 remittance against a $52,000 salary, the specific pressure of being handed a photograph of a house with a tin roof, and understanding, instantly, everything it cost to leave it behind. This is the stress test, though it does not arrive as a single dramatic event. It arrives slowly, across her first 6 years, in the form of 1,000 small non-emergencies. A pediatrician visit that doesn't require you to calculate whether you can afford it. A preschool tuition that gets paid on the first of the month without triggering a mental spreadsheet. A broken water heater that becomes an inconvenience instead of a crisis. The floor holds every single time. And because it holds quietly, without ceremony, Naledi has no way of knowing there was ever a version of this family where it might not have. The milestone that feels, retrospectively, like the real arrival doesn't happen in America at all. It happens the year you turn 43, when you finally save enough specifically earmarked, separate from the floor, to rebuild your grandmother's house. The one in the photograph, tin roof, replaced with concrete and proper drainage. A project that costs $34,000 by the time it's finished. Coordinated entirely over grainy video calls with a contractor. Your mother found through a cousin's cousin. You do not go to see it in person until the following year. When you finally stand in front of it, your mother beside you, she doesn't say much. She runs her hand along the new doorframe, the way she used to run her finger down a column of numbers in her old notebook, checking that everything adds up correctly. And for the first time in your life, you watch her cry over an amount of money without it being connected to a bill she couldn't pay. Your mother, now 71, sits with Naledi at the same kitchen table where the old ledger used to live, teaching her a card game from a country Naledi has visited exactly once, at 4 years old. Too young to remember the tin roof that has long since been replaced with something sturdier, paid for, 3 years ago, by a wire transfer you sent without telling anyone the exact amount, because some numbers, you've learned, are more useful when they stay private. You think sometimes about your father's sentence in the truck, the one you didn't understand at 18. I did not come this far for you to come this far and stop. You understand it differently now, not as pressure, but as a kind of instruction manual disguised as a warning. He wasn't asking you to outrun him. He was asking you to make sure the running eventually stopped mattering, to build something sturdy enough that the next person born into this family would never have to measure their life in remittances, gaps, and quiet redirections of an unspoken rule. You inherited nothing you could hold in your hands. No house, no account, no name that opened doors before you'd earned the right to walk through them. What you inherited instead was a rule. Money moves toward whoever needs it most urgently, and you spent 2 decades quietly rewriting who that rule was allowed to include, until eventually, without ever announcing it, the person who needed it most urgently became someone who hadn't been born yet. At 44, you and Renata set up something formal for the first time. A small scholarship fund at the community college, 2 towns from where you grew up, seeded with $50,000 and named quietly, without any ceremony, after your father, who is embarrassed by this, in a way that looks, on his face, almost exactly like pride wearing a disguise it hasn't quite mastered yet. The fund covers tuition gaps for students working nights, the way you once did, stocking shelves, cleaning offices, students who need a guidance counselor like Ms. Oduya to notice them, before the system quietly funnels them somewhere smaller than where their scores could actually take them. You don't attend the first scholarship dinner personally. You send Renata instead, because standing in a room, being thanked for something that started as a $173 monthly decision you made in secret, still feels, somehow, like claiming credit for a rule you only ever meant to redirect, not to own.